This is a presentation that I'm putting together on One Point Perspective. It's a supplement to the video included in the module on One Point Perspective. This presentation will also supplement the project description for the first assignment in the Perspective module. Take a look at this drawing. Most of what you're going to have to figure out is going to come from looking at the drawings that I'm going to show you in this presentation. If you look closely, you'll see that there is an underlying grid behind these structures that you're looking at. That grid is created using a blue colored pencil. This drawing is made on 18 by 24 inch Strathmore paper. That's important. And the structures, the little house and the cube and the cone and whatnot, those are drawn with a Sharpie fine, a fine Sharpie. So you're going to be using a fine Sharpie for the structures, a blue colored pencils for the grid, and an 18 by 24 inch piece of Strathmore 400 series paper. To begin this process, you need to lay your 18 by 24 inch paper in a horizontal position. That is a landscape position. Yes, I know when you look at this slide, it looks like the paper is oriented vertically or in a portrait position, but it is not. I just didn't take a photograph of the whole page. So orient your page in a horizontal position. That is landscape. And then I want you to draw a line across the bottom edge of the page that is parallel with the edge of the paper and perfectly horizontal. I then want you to find the center of that line. You will come in 12 inches from either side and find the center. And I would like you to lie your ruler just like this, so that ruler is exactly perpendicular to the horizontal baseline. And then I would like you to make a mark down from the top edge of the paper at the 6-inch mark. You can see I've put a little dot there and the letters CVP. They're going to represent central vanishing point. Again, that central vanishing point is 6 inches down from the very top edge of the page and 12 inches from the left and 12 inches from the right sides of the page, exactly in the center. You will also notice that that central vanishing point is exactly in the middle of the page as you look left to right. So if that piece of paper is 24 inches wide, the central vanishing point is located right at the 12-inch mark. You will also notice that I've created the horizon line. If you look very closely above the ruler, you will see a light blue line that represents the horizon. The central vanishing point is directly in the center of the horizon line, 6 inches down from the top and 12 inches in from each side. If you look towards the bottom of the page, you will notice a black box. This box represents a square seen in perspective. If there were a square of white paper lying on the desk in front of you at about arm's length, it would look like this. You would notice that the near edge was wider than the far edge. And you would notice that the sides point towards one another and create converging lines, and you would notice that those lines converge at the central vanishing point. The base of the square is exactly 3 inches wide. You'll notice that there's a tick mark in the center of the page on that bottom line, and it's directly below the central vanishing point. If you measure left 1.5 inches and right 1.5 inches, and then draw that black line in there, you'll have a black 3-inch line. And then you can draw the far side, and then you can draw the sides, so that you would have a drawing that looks like this. Use your blue pencil to draw the lines that converge at the central vanishing point, and use your black marker to create the box or square in perspective. You will notice in this slide that I have added additional 3-inch measurements to the bottom line on the page. If you look left of the square, you will see 1, 2, 3 3-inch segments. And if you look to the right of the square, you'll see 1, 2, 3 3-inch segments. So now when you look across that bottom line, it will be divided into 7 equal 3-inch segments. In this slide, you will notice that I have drawn lines from each of those 3-inch marks to the central vanishing point. You will also notice that I have drawn 2 vertical lines from the very outside edges of those 3-inch segments. Those vertical lines are exactly parallel to the edge of the paper. Be precise, don't guess. I measured to get accuracy in these lines. You will also notice that I divided these vertical lines into 3-inch segments as well. There are 4 3-inch segments starting at our baseline and moving up to just past the horizon line. You will need to do this on both sides. In this slide, I have drawn lines from the central vanishing point to each of the marks on the 2 vertical lines on the outside edges of the baseline. In this slide, I have drawn a horizontal line that exactly parallels the baseline. I have drawn this line exactly even with the far edge of the square. Notice that I have stopped this line on the diagonal line that exactly intersects the baseline and the 2 vertical lines. This new horizontal line must be exactly parallel to the bottom edge of the paper, and it must exactly coincide with the far edge of the square. Here I have added 2 additional vertical lines. These lines are exactly parallel to the edge of the paper and exactly parallel to the previous vertical lines. These lines begin at the intersection of the last horizontal line and the point where that line stops on the diagonal line that exactly intersects the baseline and the first vertical line. In this slide, you can see that I've added a diagonal line. This diagonal line begins in the lower right-hand corner of the drawing, right at the point where the baseline converges with the first right-hand vertical line. This line moves from right to left and passes through the far corner of the very first square on the lower right-hand side of the page. Once it goes through that corner, it continues across the lines that converge at the central vanishing point. That line stops on the diagonal line that runs from the central vanishing point to the left-hand corner where the baseline and the far left-hand vertical line converge. Here's a detail of the diagonal line. Notice that the line runs very precisely from the lower right-hand corner of the square to the upper left-hand corner of the square. The accuracy of this line is critical to the success of the drawing. Be precise. In this slide, I have added 2 additional horizontal lines. Now you will notice that this diagonal line, as it moves across from right to left, it intersects with some of the lines that are coming from the central vanishing point. At these points where the diagonal line intersects the lines coming from the central vanishing point are the locations for the new horizontal lines. You can see in this slide I've circled 2 of those intersections. The lower intersection already has a horizontal line drawn through it. The line below that was also drawn through one of the intersecting lines. And you can see where the circle creates that little focal point up there that I'm going to add another horizontal line that runs right through that intersection as well. This is an expanded view of the last slide. Again, notice that the diagonal line stops on the line that goes from the central vanishing point through the lower left-hand corner where the baseline and the first outside vertical line intersect. If you look at this drawing for a minute and think about how I'm creating the horizontal lines, you should be able to see that I need 1, 2, 3, 4 more horizontal lines to complete this phase of the drawing. In this slide, you can see that I have now added those 4 additional horizontal lines. You will also notice that I created another diagonal line, and this line used one of the upper squares as a starting point, and again moved through the lines that come from the central vanishing point and stopped on that same line that runs from the lower left-hand corner through the central vanishing point. All right, now the fun begins. I have just a few more lines to add before we can really start being creative. You'll notice that I have added more vertical lines. And those vertical lines begin at the point where the horizontal line touches the line that runs from the central vanishing point down through the corner. And so with this illusion, what I've done is I've created a room that has a tiled floor and tiled walls. You can see that you could continue the same process and move the tiles further and further and further back into space. But in pretty short order, the lines really start to stack up and it becomes sort of pointless. You can also see that I did not finish adding the vertical tiles on the left-hand side of the page, and that's probably something that you should do. Now that I've created this space that has a tiled floor and tiled walls, I can begin building structures in that space. This process is largely going to be trial and error. I have drawn 4, 5, or 6 different structures so that you can look at them and think about how I created them. Look for where lines begin and where lines end. If you take a look at the little house there, you can see the very ridge of the roof converges on the central vanishing point. Now, I know that it was going to converge there because the ridge of the roof is parallel to the base of the wall of the little house. And you can see that line converges at the central vanishing point. So the ridge line is going to converge at the central vanishing point. So what I would like you to do at this point is to take a pencil and start sketching in some ideas for structures of your own. I would like you to fill this space with structures. In this slide, you can see that I've added a simple cube. You can see that that cube is sitting right in the corner between the floor and the wall. You'll also notice that above that cube is an opening that goes back into the wall. And I created that illusion with a single line. I traced around one of the squares and then I drew a line back into space. If you look at the very first square we drew, I drew that going down into the floor. Simple illusions made with just a few lines. In this slide, I've added a couple of complex shapes. If you take a look right at the center, you can see that I've drawn part of a truncated cone. I took 4 squares on the bottom and I drew an X through them, and then using those points of contact as reference, I drew an ellipse. And then I raised up a little bit and did the same thing and created another ellipse. And then I joined the 2 ellipses by 2 sidelines, and I create a truncated cone that has its top cut off. And then I created, in the upper right-hand corner, kind of a weird little thing that has a hole in it that moves back into space, and I made that part of my original little block that went into the wall. In this last slide, I added a large monolith that was sitting behind the cone, and the thing that's interesting about this is that the edge, towards the bottom part of that image, the edge travels up to intersect with the central vanishing point, but towards the top, the edge travels down to intersect with the central vanishing point. If it were exactly at eye level, the line would have traveled exactly horizontally to intersect with the central vanishing point. And then the last thing I did is I added a little hole on the wall on the left side that was triangular shaped. So let me repeat myself. What I would like you to do is I would like you to start with this grid system, with the grid floor and the grid walls. And then I would like you to play. I would like you to experiment. I would like you to try things. I would like you to be creative. And I want you to do this with a simple pencil. And I want you to sketch lightly. So I want you to start sketching these structures in to fill this space. When you get one that really works and you have all the kinks worked out of it and you know exactly how you want it to be, then you can go over those pencil lines with a Sharpie and you can create a really bold permanent image. And then the very last thing I did with this drawing is I took out my eraser and I gently erased over the whole entire drawing. And that did a couple things for me. The first thing is it removed all my sketch lines that I'd put down with pencil. The other thing that it did is it lightened up my blue colored pencil lines and made them less obvious. And when that happened, they sort of moved into the background and allowed my ink lines to be really bold and interesting. So this is what I want you to do. I want you to fill the space. I want you to put more stuff in here than I did. I think there's plenty room for other kinds of things. You can have one shape piercing another shape. You can have shapes layered in front and behind. You can have transparent shapes. There are just a lot of things that you can do if you will just experiment. All right, good luck with this.